This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Construction Record. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me I have...
I'm Gavin Daly from Axis Communications.
And Gavin, Axis Communications, we were just talking in the green room beforehand about how you used to do, and you still do, security. But security on job sites is just one aspect of what you do because of how technology has evolved. So maybe you could explain how that works.
Sure, yeah, and I think it's a great thing to ask. I think you have to kind of look at the past a little bit before you talk about the present or the future and where things are going. So you're correct where security was the primary focus of what we did. And if you looked at traditional security systems on a construction, for example, the traditional approach was put cameras all over the place. You point them in the general area that you're interested in. They tend to be sitting there just recording 24/7. And typically what would happen is an incident occurs, whether it's a legal activity or there's a health and safety related issue or something happens that essentially we call it investigator or whoever is running the security department or the end customer wants to go back and review that video and hopefully they catch the event. And that would be one thing. And then the second part of catching the event would be hopefully you can see the details clearly and actually identify whether it's a person or we're trying to catch a license plate of a vehicle. So it was very reactive, I suppose, way of doing things. Whereas if you fast forward to today, and the future in general and where things are going, security is still definitely a big part. We can't forget about that. But systems are more proactive, and the amount of intelligence that is now available on the edge means that these devices can be considered much more than just security devices. They're essentially computers, right? They have a chip on board, a CPU, and you could call them IoT devices. Is probably a more popular term. They run artificial intelligence-based algorithms, and I'll just pick some examples. I mean, imagine a construction site where somebody was to light a fire or smoke was detected. That technology actually exists on board the camera. So maybe I put it there for security, but hey, it's also a smoke detector. Just as one example. So we're seeing a lot more trends and things move in that direction. Alerting operators, because if nobody's really sitting paying attention to these things, we're relying on the technology to sort of tell us and allow us to be proactive and sort of move from that reactive state that traditionally security systems would sit in.
And so does it, you mentioned facial recognition and that sort of thing. And so is that used for, besides safety concerns, well, maybe actually safety as well, but also stuff like keeping track of productivity? Is that something now you have to keep an eye on it? Other streams that come out of this camera that then you have to sort of interpret?
Well, yeah. I mean, in terms of the facial recognition piece, the more popular use case would have to do with access control. So it's finding who's coming and going. Do they have access, the authority to be at this facility, to go through this door? Some of the trends that are kind of being accelerated by this whole global situation that we're in are the need for more frictionless or low touch entry systems. So the ability to walk up, have a device at the main point of entry, like could be a doorway or could be a vehicle entrance driving through a gated entry onto the site and automatically detecting, okay, matching that face to a database. This is an employee, they're authorized to be here. That's fine. Automatically open the gate, let them in, and maybe create some kind of tight time and date stamp associated with that event that could be later audited should that be a requirement. So it's less about the big kind of big brother approach, I guess, of collecting all these databases and using it for, say, marketing means, although the technology is there to do it for sure, but the industry, I would say, isn't really warming up to that kind of use case, I guess, where I'm going. So we tend to see, again, it's the access control type scenarios. It's less about spotting the bad guy as opposed to letting in the good guy, I guess. Maybe a simple way I could put it. But it's also a good segue, I think, to talk about low touch entry systems in general, because everybody these days has a smartphone, right? I mean, it's pretty rare these days to not. Facial recognition is one thing, but access control is another. And the days of having to carry a fob or card around, I mean, that's still a very popular way to gain access to a site, right? You're an employee or you're a visitor, you get given some kind of card. They would call that a credential, and then you usually present that and open a door. And what we're starting to see a lot more of now is, because they have cameras, could be intercoms on a doorway. And I could very easily issue you a QR code. People probably know what a QR code is. That QR code can be presented to a intercom that has a built-in camera, and it's analyzing through video the code and saying, okay, this is a valid credential, let this person in, kind of thing. You see use cases there as well.
Now, you mentioned the pandemic, and I just thought myself, I wonder if the acceptance of security, I mean, obviously security is important on a site to begin with, but you go down the grocery store and you see security people there, and that's something you just wouldn't have seen a year ago. Like, you'd be out of nowhere, and now we just kind of accept it. Have you found sort of a more of an acceptance of security measures on the site as well, or is it just kind of same as business as usual?
Yeah, I suppose it depends who you ask, but absolutely, I think it's just becoming more commonplace, and maybe we're a bit more used to it. Well, now the question becomes like, what's the person there for? Because examples we see are occupancy, so controlling how many people
right, exactly, yeah,
access to the site. So I would call that more like maybe it's more of a health and safety angle than security. But the question is, or the question comes down to, is it a good use of a resource, I suppose, to stand there and count who's coming in and out? Because that's a use case, with our devices and just in the industry in general. You can count, a camera can count automatically how many people are coming in and out, vehicles that are on site, and give you real-time counting with thresholds. Okay, so for example, if there's, I'll pick a random number, but maybe 50 people are at a given time are allowed to be on that site. Well, you can create intelligent, actionable alerts, so that when those thresholds are reached, what would you call it? Restrict access to any more people until at least some existing people leave, or they may just want to use that for reporting. So the ability to get in and pull the data and sort of just get an idea. Are we kind of over our limit, under the limit? Are we kind of spot on? And at what times? And trying to identify trends. So it's less about, say, okay, we only allow 50 and the 51st person comes in, sound off the alarm and sort of all hell breaks loose, which we don't want. I mean, it's less about that, but just getting that information from the system, I think I'd probably say that's the more common use case in what we see. I mean, we're talking construction, I know, but it's hard not to segue it into retail a little bit, because that's where we tend to see that as well. Maybe it's not a security person, but it's a person who's standing there with a clicker and counting who comes in and out, or manually.
Right. Yeah.
That's a pretty antiquated way of doing things, in our opinion. It's very easy to augment that. It's not about replacing the person or anything like that. It's about having them do things that are maybe more useful, more meaningful, and leveraging the technology to try to add a level of automation to things.
And where do you see this going post-pandemic? Because eventually it's going to end, but you've already got the technology in place. So where does it go from there?
Yeah, really good question. And trust me, me more than anyone else will be looking forward to when this does come to an end. I think what's going to happen is the technology is not going to get ripped out and people are going to say, hey, we're back to normal. We don't need this stuff anymore. If somebody's going to invest in our technology, it's very important that you add an element of future proof into the system. So maybe you don't want to count people coming in and out of a facility for occupancy limits, but would that not be useful information to have, just generally speaking, like what kind of traffic is coming in and out of my facility and how long are kind of people in and before they leave, and getting those kind of metrics out of a system can still provide some useful information. But that would be one. And if you have invested in, for example, a low touch or frictionless entry system, and you've made things more convenient and easy for people to kind of use the system, why would you want to remove that, I guess? Pandemic. Likely you'd want to keep it in because I suppose the truth is that there's been a lot of bad things happen with the pandemic. There's been a lot of advancements as well, and things that I think will stick around for quite a few years to come.
And just in the more immediate term, what have people been coming to you for? Like besides the obvious, like what are some of the trends that you didn't see coming that people have started requesting?
Yeah, there's been quite a few things actually, and I suppose where would I start? I mean, the first one would be leveraging the system for things other than occupancy. And for example, we've gone crazy with the amount of cleaning and sanitizing and things that needs to happen at these facilities. So an interesting one that came up was maintenance of washrooms. Now, we would never put surveillance in a washroom. That's a big no-no. But to the entryway into these facilities, coming in and out, what we found was take a cleaning staff at a facility would go and clean every single time, or they'd have it on a schedule once an hour. Now imagine you could get actionable data from the system that said, well, nobody came in and actually used this facility. If nobody came in the last 2 hours, like, is there any point going sending someone to clean it? So it became this operational efficiency thing. So we definitely saw a lot of that. We saw the increase of a need for automated systems for entry into a building. So the QR codes for visitor management, not having to physically give someone a credential, not even having to physically press a button on an intercom, maybe get access to a facility. So automating all of those things has come up as well. And I suppose the other one, probably a long list, but the other one that came up is streaming. So live streaming, remote learning is really big. We're on kind of virtual calls all the time, and it's less about having to be physically present all the time, which is kind of interesting because our roots were in webcams before we even got to security. So in a kind of, we're going forward, but in a way we're actually going into the past a little bit. So we've seen a much, like imagine you want to broadcast a meeting. I mean, most laptops and people's phones have webcams, but if you're doing more of a larger scale environment that involves lots of people or having to present to large groups of people, or you want to stream online, you can use our cameras to do that. Direct tie-ins to all of the popular platforms.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah,
because previous to the pandemic, that was, I mean, I guess it was sort of a trend in certain sectors, but it wasn't the overall thing it is now, where everybody started doing it, and for very good reasons. Like even with what I do, I've covered a number of conferences this year, and I haven't left my computer room. so it's happening everywhere.
Yeah, it is. It's a global thing for sure. It's quite interesting. There is one more, maybe a couple more actually. It's hard not to talk about it, but the big one that came up as well is cybersecurity. We're talking about network-based devices here. So construction is no different. You're putting devices on a network, and you got to make sure that you're securing things down. So that's become a lot more prevalent in the last year, because if you follow a lot of the news during this pandemic, the number of cyber attacks has grown. You hear about things like ransomware and all these kind of. But we really made the stance of having a very strong cybersecurity policy, which in our industry, it wasn't really a big thing a number of years ago. It was maybe behind the traditional IT industry, and now it's kind of becoming more of a let's have this. Let's talk about this way earlier in the discussion. We've seen an acceleration of, I suppose, of companies trying to lock things down, tightening up the systems or hardening of the systems in general. And the devices we sell, like the network audio, network video, access control, the list goes on. You got to really go above and beyond, I suppose, the basics of changing, username, password, and implementing more stringent policies to really mitigate all the risks. So that's come up a lot as well.
Now, I know with various projects and sensors, I think I can't remember which company it was. It might have been PCL. They worked on the Stantec Tower in Edmonton, and they monitored the temperature and what they were doing for HVAC, and they sort of rejiggered their schedules around that and managed to be much more productive. So to do that, they need to get all this data out of those sensors. How does a company get data out of your cameras and other equipment, and then sort of into something they can work with, and then sort of use that data to modify what they do?
Yeah, really, really good question. And that's another thing that's come up actually for us as well, because first of all, if you're talking about using network-based video surveillance camera to help determine just general presence in an area or occupancy, you can absolutely tie that back into the building's automation and say, okay, we're X amount capacity, do this to the heating, more heating, less or more cooling, depending. Yeah. And lighting actually would be the other one I should probably mention. So we see a lot more smart lighting, things like that. So how does it tie in? That comes down to architecture. So open architecture, I would probably make a point to highlight here. So that the systems that we generally are developing are all open architecture, meaning they're made to tie into other systems. So it's less about locking you into proprietary solutions and not being able to tie it in, because we definitely don't want that. So things like the APIs are all open. They're published. Any HVAC company, for example, can tie into our devices. We'll send them the scripts or the APIs, and we talk all of the most common, I guess, today, things like JSON and SOAP, and you're starting to see the systems can kind of cross and talk together, and that will be probably another way to help justify and keep a system in there post-pandemic, right? I mean, why would you not want to do that if there's a cost, I guess, a cost savings element to this, where that okay, you could go on a schedule. I mean, like people traditionally are doing, but there's a lot of you can't always go by the calendar.
Right.
If you want it to be, I guess, accurate, right?
And just to wander into the realm of sci-fi for a second, and maybe not, where do drones and robotics and those kind of emerging technologies, where do they, if they do, fit into all this?
Well, actually, so drones is an interesting one, because robotics in general. So, sure, where to start with that? This is just what I've seen in the industry lately. What people are more interested in when it comes to drones, let's say, is detection of the drones themselves. So like we wouldn't necessarily put our devices on the drones, but we would work with companies that detect the drones.
Right.
They would talk to our devices, our cameras, through the open architecture that I mentioned before. And they would tie into nearby cameras like our pan-tilt zoom cameras. They can actually follow and track the drone as it's flying through the air, which is kind of cool. So it would be, if you didn't want unwanted visitors or somebody flying a drone onto your facility, you would design it that way that you have essentially a series of radars around the perimeter, and our cameras would then be talking to them, and they would sort of track, could alert an operator that, hey, there's somebody flying a DJI Phantom at the facility, and send an alert. Do you want to do something about it? So kind of, maybe not where you were going with the question, but that's
no, that's fine. It's still an applicable thing. Like, I mean, I would imagine, I was thinking corporate espionage, but it could very well be some kid with something he bought at Best Buy, right? So,
well, definitely, because the thing is, a lot of the manufacturers of drones, so like DJI, I'll mention just in particular because they do have these zones that you're restricted to fly in. Like you couldn't fly it over an airport if you tried to, right? They have them all kind of mapped out with GPS and coordinates, and then you've got sort of heavily regulated by Transport Canada, right? But if somebody wants to build something in their basement, and which anybody can now do, any hobbyist, and fly it around, there's not a whole lot that would stop you from doing that, right? That's where maybe the dangerous part of things comes in, because you're wondering, well, what's it there for? Okay, maybe it's a hobbyist with some aerial photography, or it could be something else, right? And,
right, exactly.
Definitely heard some stories and some concerns from various customers in different segments. I'll say that's a problem for, and we've started to deploy solutions for that. The challenge is the countermeasures, I guess you could say, especially in Canada. You're not really allowed to do anything. Like, you can't jam the signal because it interferes with aircraft. You can't shoot it out of the sky, as fun as it might be. So
true.
Really, but really all you can do is follow it and track it and see what it does, and then kind of make that human decision of what you want to do next, right? Usually find the pilot, I guess, is the common thing people try to do there. Guy sitting, maybe a kilometer away in a parking lot, right? Outside of Walmart.
And if there's any other questions people have, or they're interested in the technology you're talking about, where would be the best place to check out your company?
Yeah, sure. A couple of ways. Probably website's the easiest one, but go to axis.com. You can also feel free to phone in. There's a phone number. It's 444-2947, and they can speak to anyone on the team if they have a particular challenge, or they just want to learn more about our technology. Very happy to have a discussion and see if we could help them solve a problem.
Oh, great. Thanks, Gavin.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.